So this is a smudge of sage here. I picked this up just outside of Fort Saskatchewan, on the side of a road actually, and I'm just rolling it in a little ball so it burns well, and I try and have some good thoughts as I even prepare before the smudge. So it goes into the smudge, and then I place it in a shell. You can put it in a bowl or a pan. A lot of things people use. And what the purpose of the smudge is to, it's like holy water, you could say.
Okay.
You know how people use that to help pray. So the way I was taught is this is like a way to pray, and the smoke then carries up your prayers to Creator. My elder tells me, he says, you don't really need to do this stuff. You have everything you need inside anyways. Okay. But I like to do it. It's nice because I've been doing it for a long time. So, it's like a nice thing that I like to do.
Do you find it changes the way you approach like whatever you're doing after?
Yeah, I think so, because it gives me time to reflect, meditate, focus on how to do things in a good way.
Okay.
And even just the smell, it helps remind me to speak in a good way, think in a good way, hear in a good way. And that's what it's all about. Right. A lot of First Nation cultures might use a smudge as like a call to order. Like this is a way to start the day or start a meeting or a process, and it helps people come together in a humble way, and then they can have a good conversation where we're in a safe space about truth.
Right.
So that's why I thought it would be good to bring today.
Oh, I like it. No, it's a cool idea. I love it. I've never been a part of it. I've seen it, so I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for involving me.
Yeah, my pleasure. No, thanks for the interest. I see you have tobacco,
yes.
And usually we do that beforehand.
Okay. Yeah. Walk me through it.
Sure. The tobacco is considered a sacred medicine.
Okay.
Just like the sage is. Other sacred medicines are sweetgrass and cedar, and you can find those all over North America.
Right.
Just growing wild. The tobacco has been in North America, Turtle Island, for thousands of years and grown wild. It was first used by a lot of First Nations as a medicine to pray with. And what I've been told was the tobacco gets your heart beating.
Okay.
And it energizes your heart. And when you pray, you got to pray with your heart.
Okay.
So it helps you kind of focus your prayer. Yeah. And again, the smoke will carry that prayer up to Creator. So the tobacco is a very sacred medicine, and it is given as an offering to. I've seen it as for offerings for a lot of things. Like if you're hunting, you offer tobacco to the animal that you harvested, or even if you're gathering medicines. So when I got when I picked the sage here, an elder that I was with, he said a prayer and offered tobacco to the earth as a thank you for allowing us to harvest the sage. You'd give it if you're cutting down a tree. I've seen it, tobacco being offered to the tree for giving up its life for us. We offer tobacco to elders to ask them to help us in some ways. And that's a very specific protocol in a lot of First Nations.
Okay.
They'd ask you, I've had elders say, you put the tobacco in your left hand because that's the closest to your heart. And then when you offer the tobacco, you ask from your heart to the elder, what is it that you're asking for? A blessing for the day, or maybe some ceremony to help you in a good way. And then so you offer that tobacco with that ask right from your heart. And then the elder will accept it if they can fulfill the request.
Gotcha.
If they can't, then they'll try and help you find another way, maybe another elder or something. But they won't accept the tobacco. So gotcha. It's kind of like, in some ways, like a contract as well. It could be seen that way also.
I like that. So with the using resources from the land, it's like I'm taking something, I'm giving something.
That's right.
Fulfill that balance.
That's right. Yeah. Like it's all about that mindset, that worldview of reciprocity.
Oh, yeah.
So when Mother Earth gives to us freely, she doesn't charge us a ticket to go pick berries or, gather water, right?
Right.
So we keep that in mind when we then give freely back to Mother Earth or to our community, to people. We have that same sense of giving back, and it's all connected, right?
So showing appreciation. And
yeah.
Like that. Awesome. Well, let me do this then.
Yeah.
So this is my first time ever giving tobacco. I've never done it. I know it's a thing so this is my opening ceremony. I'm learning how to do this. So I've over the years through my work and through the podcast, I've started to speak to a lot of Indigenous people, and I want to start showing that respect because I want to do that, right? So so I wanted to offer you this tobacco for sharing your knowledge and your experience, and opening up about your truth so that it can help heal your wounds as well as the wounds of the nation, right? So that was kind of my own, so there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I will accept the tobacco, and we'll have a smudge and then have a conversation in a good way here. So.
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Kristoff, and on this podcast we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Now today's episode was a doozy. It's one of those episodes that I struggle with trying to know what to do or how to do it because I want to be helpful, but I'm lucky enough to have some good contacts, and I reached out to a gentleman who I've had on the podcast before, I think episode 4. His name is Michael Gubbels, and he has worked a lot with Indigenous nations for a long time. He's very involved. He's Métis himself, and I wanted to bring him on to talk about residential schools and trauma and that kind of stuff. And I know some people may think, well, this is an environmental podcast. This is about forestry and stuff like that. And what does this have to do with it? And the truth is that Indigenous people's lives are inherently tied to the land that we manage. And their cultural well-being and their physical well-being and their health of their community is completely tied into that. And in order for us to do a good job as managers of the landscape, we have to be stewards of the land, right? We have to include all values. We have to be empathetic and compassionate towards the values of others. And one of those huge values that we need to be including is Indigenous values. And so if you're a forest professional, if you're an environmental professional, a conservationist or whatever, you need to know about this stuff. You need to understand the trauma. You need to understand the history, and you need to take onus on it and to know it and to be able to go forward with that knowledge in order to do things right, to do things in a good way, as Michael likes to say. So it was a great conversation, really long, really open, really honest. Michael is awesome. He's really able to tap into his own personal reasons for doing the work that he does, and for his personal opinions about the way we're going and how we can achieve a more unified nation, how we can achieve, the ultimate Canada kind of thing, as we say closer to the end. Just, you know what I mean? A nation of multitudes of cultures that can come together and support each other and be good and raise each other up, right? And that's what Canada's supposed to be. And so we talk about in order to achieve that, we need to talk about the history and the past and not point fingers or lay blame. These are all things that Michael said. He said just to recognize and to know and to move forward with that knowledge. So, yeah, with the light of the 215 children's bodies found at the residential school in Kamloops and another 100 and some in Brandon, and I'm sure more and more of this is going to come up as they search these schools. I thought it was important to have Michael on again to talk about the history of residential schools, the trauma, the suicides, all the terrible shit that's happened to them, because it's hard and it sucks and we don't want to hear it, but we have to hear it. And so I appreciated Michael coming on to talk about this kind of stuff because it's hard to do. And he really opened up. And so thank you, Michael, for your knowledge and for everything. It was great. We do try to open up at the beginning talking about the beauty of Indigenous culture and to try and talk about what it can accomplish so it's not all doom and gloom. But I mean, how can it not be doom and gloom with what, you know what I mean? So we finish off with a lot of hope and a lot of hope for the future. And it's a good, inspiring episode. It really went well. It's not just us talking about all the bad shit that Canada's done. It's very much a hopeful message and one that rings true to, I think, a lot of people's views and to how we can heal these wounds and grow as a nation, right? So it was great. I loved it. And yeah, it's I hope you guys like it. I'd also like to recognize that there's something that I haven't done, but I'm going to start doing now, is that this podcast is being recorded on Treaty 6 territory. That's something that I never have done before, and I don't know why, but I'm going to start doing it because it's important to know. And Michael brought that to my attention, so he points it out as well, but I'm going to start doing it for all my episodes now. So yeah, this is Treaty 6 territory, and we need to know that, and let's continue on with the episode with that knowledge in mind. One way I was thinking I would like to start would be I feel like the story about First Nations and Indigenous people, the narrative, I should say, is very much about trauma and suffering and cultural genocide and like all these terrible things, and we never get to hear about the culture itself and the beauty of the culture itself and the way. So I wanted to give you the opportunity before we get into all the terrible stuff to talk about. I want to get into your story, but after I want to talk about what is it about. I just wanted you the opportunity to talk about the beauty of the culture and what you like and how it makes you feel and why you think it's important.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Are we recording now?
Yeah, we're recording. Let's do this.
Sure. So when we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land first. And I'd like to acknowledge the land as the source of all of our livelihood. I'd like to acknowledge that all the flyers, the four-legged, the swimmers, they all support our lives. And I'd like to acknowledge that land. And I'd like to acknowledge that we're here on Treaty 6 land. And the homeland of Métis First Nations people. Since time immemorial, there's been Indigenous people living here. And I'd like to acknowledge them for shaping this land. And I'd like to acknowledge them for agreeing to enter into treaty so that my family could come and live here and thrive here. And I love this land, and I'm very grateful for them and this land itself. And these land acknowledgements are a traditional practice. They go beyond what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had asked in their calls to action, that we acknowledge the land and the treaties and Indigenous peoples, this being their homeland. The land acknowledgements go beyond because they're first and foremost to acknowledge the land as our source of life. And so I'd like to carry on that tradition and begin today's discussion with that acknowledgement. Other things about the culture that I've learned over time have been very, just as meaningful to me. And just, a bit about myself, I guess. So I'm Michael Gubbels, and I've had the opportunity to work with many Indigenous peoples over my life, many knowledge holders, wisdom keepers, elders. And I'm Métis myself on my mom's side, from the Red River region in Manitoba. I'm from the Ducharme family on my mom's side. And when I first found out, it was very difficult for me because I grew up in a lot of Western Prairie Canadian towns. I played hockey. I was a regular Canadian kid. And I guess I picked up a lot of unfortunate myths and misconceptions about Indigenous people. And then lo and behold, I find out when I'm about 12 that I am one, that I am Indigenous. Yeah. And it was very difficult for me. And it was like a deep secret and almost like a shame. And I didn't share. And it took me until I was about 22, and I went back to school, and I was looking for some scholarship funding. And there was Belcourt Brasso Métis Awards that I could access, which has a great story to itself, how those awards came up, maybe for another podcast. Sure. But one of the conditions to access some of the funding was, what is your involvement in the Aboriginal community? And at that time, I had 0. And I was like, well, I really need my books paid for. That'd really help. So how can I get involved in the Indigenous Aboriginal community? So there at the school I was at, there is an Aboriginal Student Union. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just go and join their meetings and see, if that helps, if I can, get involved that way. But I remember walking into that room, the council office that they had set up in the school, and it had a big title over the top, Aboriginal Student Union. And I remember how embarrassed I was walking in there, looking over my shoulder, people will now know that I'm Indigenous, right? Aboriginal. So I remember feeling that, and I was so awkward and scared, sitting there in that room. But that ended up being the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because I got the opportunity to work with elders. I got the opportunity to learn about my culture and to challenge those myths that I had and misconceptions. And I ended up getting the opportunity to participate in a sweat lodge. And I remember sitting there. One of the elders says to me, she says, you know what the longest journey you're ever going to take in your life is? And I was like, oh, geez, I don't know. I was thinking of maybe one day going to China or something. And she says, it's 6 inches, plus or minus a couple inches, depending on how tall you are. And I was like, what? And then she showed me from her heart, and then she points to her chin, to your head. That's the longest journey you're ever going to take, from your heart to your head. And I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know what that means, but thanks for sharing. But then I was in the lodge, they kept inviting me, and I kept going. And I think I was in the 4th lodge. And the elder told me there that was leading the lodge, he says, if you're having trouble today with the heat, if it's too hot for you, we'll always stop it. That's okay. You just say all my relations 4 times, and then we know that it's too much for you, and we'll open the door and let the cool air in and give you some water. But before that, try to pray with the person that's praying. But don't just pray with your mind, pray with your heart. And I was like, okay, thanks for the advice. Like, still no clue
Right.
what he's talking about.
Right.
But that, I think it was the third round. It did get very hot in the lodge, and I almost couldn't bear it anymore. I was ready to like dig my way out of there and
Right.
climb out.
Right.
And I was about to call all my relations 4 times. And before the round can end and we open up the door and let the cool air in, we have to let everybody pray. So everybody went in a circle and prayed. And I remember my prayer when it came to me, it was so hot. When it came to me, my prayer lasted 2 seconds. You know, I'm like, okay, next. And there's 2 people left before they'd open the door. And the person next to me, I was like, oh, okay, thanks. I'm so thankful. There's 2 left and I'm almost through. And the person next to me, though, their prayer was this epically long prayer that just would not stop. And I remember getting frustrated with them. Like, are you not feeling this? Like, how can you just keep praying and praying and praying? And I was getting frustrated and almost angry at them.
You're thinking they're being inconsiderate almost.
Exactly.
Right.
And of course, that just made everything worse, that feeling, you know, it just made it more hot for me, more uncomfortable.
Uh-huh.
And I was about to call it for everyone in the middle of her prayer. And then the elder's words came to me. If you're having trouble, pray with your heart. And with the person, pray with them. So I thought, well, I got nothing to lose. I might as well try this praying with your heart thing. You know, and I did. I started praying in my mind with her. And then I started hearing what she was praying for. And I started feeling compassion for her. And then I felt it. I felt my heart, my feelings were behind my prayer with her. And as soon as I felt that, the heat disappeared from me. And I could have stayed in there for an infinite long amount of time. There's no problem after that. And that just blew me away. It blew me away because I didn't know how I could have that much control over my environment like that. Just with my own prayer connecting to my heart. So it made me think more and more, like, what is this prayer with your heart? And I kept working with the elders more and I started praying more and then, you know, a lot of coincidences would happen in my life, I guess you could say. Like things that I pray for would happen. Things people prayed for me would happen. Good things.
Right.
Even better than what I actually prayed for.
Right.
And I was like, what is going on? You know? It culminated to the point where I was even in a relationship that was straining on me and, you know, and us, right? Just, you know, like most people have in their life,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
So it was time to move on and we broke up and it was really rough. You know, I had a tough time. There's, you know, friends were involved and it was just relationships were kind of unraveling and, I remember really having like, you know, low moments in my life. And in those moments, I remember I was trying to pray again with my heart here for, you know, my ex and for my friends and everybody. I was really trying hard to pray for them. And then I came in humility, to the Great Spirit, to God, to the Creator. And I said, okay, I'm ready for my soulmate. To ask, you know, I'm ready for my soulmate. It's hard to even ask like you deserve your soulmate, right?
Yeah.
But I was again like at that, like a low point and just struggling, with trying to sleep at night and that type of thing. And I just remember always praying, okay, I'm ready for my soulmate. And I got specific. I'm like visualizing her. I'm like, okay, I want her to have dark curly hair, like me.
Sure.
I want her to be a Sagittarius like me.
Yeah.
Because I think we're fun that way.
Yeah.
I want her to be educated. I want her to be, to have a good career. I want her to pray. I want her to be able to pray with me. I want her to be beautiful. I want her to be fun. I want her to travel with me, and I want her to train Kung Fu with me. Because I've trained since 92, a big part of my life. And I'm not thinking anything of it, but this is my prayer. Very specific. And an elder even told me, like, yeah, be specific. It's okay. You can be specific. I'm like, okay. And, so I pray, and not thinking much of it. I'm at a festival a couple months later, see a woman there, and she's just standing, holding some olives, talking with her friend, I go up and I steal some olives from her randomly. Like, what a thief,
Good pickup line, yeah.
I just go try and steal her olives. Like, who do I think I am? But she looked at me and was like, okay, here you go. Have some olives. And I was like, really? I was kind of like shocked, actually. I thought she'd be like, get out of here.
Yeah.
Don't look at me again. But we ended up connecting, having a great time. Had a date with her, found out that she was everything I prayed for. Of course, I didn't tell her that, but she had a good job, good education. She was spiritual, prayed, dark curly hair, beautiful, everything I asked for. Loved to travel. I couldn't believe it. Except she didn't train Kung Fu. I was like, well, that's pretty hard to get. So, but her dad did train Kung Fu with my Sifu's Kung Fu brother back in Hong Kong. I was like, that's close enough.
That's pretty good.
I'm gonna roll with it and see where this takes me. And in the end, I did. She did end up training with me. And she got her blue belt. She can use 2 swords at once. She went to the Shaolin Temple with me. And she's my wife now of 10 years. So coming up to 10 years. And, she's like everything that I prayed for plus more. It came out of that time of doubt and, anxiety, and this beautiful life now came from that for me. And we have 2 beautiful children. Like, I'm just, every day I'm amazed. It's not like it's not a lot, it's not like it's not a lot of hard work every day.
Sure.
Still.
Yeah.
It's still a lot of hard work, like every relationship and life. But just looking back to where I was and where I am now, it's better all around for everybody.
Right.
And so that is, I guess, the culmination in a lot of ways of my story of reconnecting with my culture. And I didn't know that beauty, that wisdom, and that benefit was there.
Right.
I was used to before, the myths that Indigenous people just want handouts and they're lazy and, and that's what I thought. I didn't know that there's so many cultures and there's so much wisdom that could benefit, and I feel, I'm just, reaching the tip of the iceberg. Like, the more deeper we go, the more benefit there is. And, even I think a lot of, international organizations, United Nations, academic, organizations, corporations, companies, they're realizing this more and more that, there is such a benefit to partnering with Indigenous peoples, to working with them, in their cultures, in areas of like, biodiversity, conservation, balancing development, like a lot of simple, fascinating ways, to support our way of life in a good way, to deal even with like a lot of family challenges, to deal with a lot of growing up challenges. I think if the elders were in our schools, I totally believe there'd be much less depression and anxiety amongst our youth. Because they're able to help us, teach us ways to really get connected, connected to ourselves, connected to the earth, and that's a healthy way to live,
Absolutely.
It has a lot of meaning, right? I'm sure how you get that feeling like why do we spend so much time, energy, and money to go in the middle of nowhere in a bush where they don't even have running water, why is this relaxing for us,
right. Yeah.
For some of us. And, it's that feeling that we get just being there, right? You can't really put it into words, but
stepping away from the chaos. Yeah.
Yeah. This simplicity and hearing the wind is medicine. Smelling the trees and the plants, it's medicine, all of that is so crucial for our connectedness and healing, I think. And so yeah, that basically, I guess in a nutshell, is like my experience, coming from shame, to a place of, connectedness.
Yeah.
And I totally encourage people to kind of, maybe step outside of what they might, know or be comfortable with, step outside a lot of the messages that we might have grown up with.
The preconceived notions.
Yeah.
And
come at it with an open mind and open heart, to where a lot of Indigenous people are coming from, in Canada and around the world too. So,
absolutely. Yeah, that's one thing, just as an aside, that's one thing that I recorded. I helped Amy Christensen do this Good Fire podcast talking about cultural burning. Mm-hmm. We did 10 episodes globally, speaking from people from Australia to Brazil to all over the place. And that was one thing that finally clicked for me, was the Indigenous experience around the globe is nearly identical, because they all experience colonialism. They all have the same scars, not the same, but you know what I mean? Similar stories, similar hurdles and tragedies that befell them. Yeah. And it just kind of hit me, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess like it was a strange thing for me to recognize. Right.
Yeah.
So talking about, like you mentioned the shame, right? And when we first spoke in the first episode that we talked, you were talking about the shame as well. And I wanted to, my intent with reaching out to you, right? We've been talking for a while, but this whole, the mass grave was found in Kamloops, and now there's been another one found in Brandon. And you're talking about this shame, and I wanted to try to explore with you, if you're comfortable, where do you think this shame comes from? Where did it originate from? And I mean, it's kind of a loaded question. I have an idea, but I would like for you to explain to me where you think it comes from, and why you think it culminated over the last century or two, and why do you feel that most Indigenous people that weren't connected to their culture felt this way, and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd like to reiterate what you're saying about Indigenous people around the world. Like, yes, there is a common story there. That is one of the main reasons why the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples came through, because there's the same threats to culture, personal safety, health, and livelihood. I think that shame comes from a feeling that one way of life is superior to another way of life. I think that is the original mistake that was made by residential schools, is thinking, well, these people here are primitive. They're basically Stone Age people. You know, we're here to bring them the advances of technology.
The gift of God.
Yeah, exactly. And that too, yeah. The gift of God. And so coming in with that mindset, creating the schools with that mindset, that's where the shame comes from. So the children go to these schools and, you know, the children's minds are so, you know, flexible, right? They'll take in any teaching that comes.
I think it's important. Sorry to cut you off, but I think it's important to point out that it's not like the children went to the school. They were forcibly removed, and essentially, like one thing that was put into perspective when I was reading all our relations was she put into perspective that like I have a 2-year-old, and my wife brought it up to me last night. She was like, Violet is of the age where a government official, a stranger, would have come into our house, picked up our child, and took her, and we would have no idea where she is, maybe never hear from her again.
That's right.
And that's what happened to hundreds of thousands of Indigenous families. And you hear it and you see it in the news, but when you actually, for me, internalize it, I think last night, honestly, when my wife mentioned that about our daughter, I was like, oh yeah, like shit, like that changes the way you perceive it. Yeah. Rather than just hearing it like it's a movie or something, right? I encourage everyone to kind of think about it that way. If you have children, like imagine some person walked in and said, I'm from the government or I'm from the church, I'm taking your child. Yeah. And just forcibly remove them. So anyway, sorry, I cut you off in the middle of it, but I wanted to.
That's okay.
I think it's an important distinction to make.
It is.
It wasn't enrollment, right? They were basicly kidnapped or were kidnapped.
Yeah. I have stories from elders that have shared with me that when they're older, they knew when the RCMP were coming to round up the children and take them. And they're trying to hide. And the RCMP were called because, you know, government officials knew they were trying to hide. Yeah. And he remembers, this elder tells me a story. He tried to save as many children as he could by running into the bush. And he, even to this day, tears come to his eyes when he talks about it because of the children that he couldn't save, of the children that he just couldn't run fast enough to take them away. That's some things people don't understand that, you know, that it did happen, that RCMP did come and, you know, take children away from the arms of their families, you know, to go to these schools where they're seen as, you know, heathen or primitive people. They're taught to be ashamed of their whole culture, history, ancestors. You know, they're taught that they were worshiping the devil.
You spoke about the malleability of children's minds when they're...
And they take it all in. They take it all in. And that shame sticks with them for the rest of their life. It's part of their worldview now. And it gets passed down to their children. And with also other government measures that serve to weaken or destroy the cultures, you know, the elders don't have, they didn't have the ability to pass their teachings on. So the children didn't even know how beneficial some of these teachings could be in their life. You know, like not only were children being taken by RCMP and government, you know, teachers and priests and nuns. There were other measures the government put in as well that served to, you know, explicitly destroy the culture. Like ceremonies were banned. So I don't know. You know, you talk about people like trying to have compassion by visualizing their own children being taken away. You can also visualize if you went to church and the police coming in and giving everybody a fine, taking away the vestments of the priest, putting the priest in jail, or going to an Oilers game, everyone there being, sanctioned in some way or told to disperse, and all the teams being arrested and their gear being, that is essentially what happened for many generations for Indigenous people. Their culture was illegal. There's also the pass system and like the peasant farming policy, which served then to like impoverish the people, among other policies. So you have an impoverished people with a culture that's illegal. It's really easy for then the kids to look around and be like, oh, all my community is poor, and not even they are practicing their culture. Like, yes, it must be a primitive culture. It must not be, something that needs to be saved, or, it just reaffirms that shame. Just talking about the children found in Kamloops too. Though not only were those the mental scars, and the trauma that kind of arose from just the shame and these things that we talked about. If you look into the history and you read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission final report, you'll find that there is also that these schools were very, very dangerous. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission says that there were reports of in the early 1900s when the schools were really becoming accelerated. When the children went there, the schools were also underfunded. So there was a lot of hunger and malnutrition in the schools. And this led to staggeringly high rates of mortality for children in these schools. In some cases, up to 75% of the children passed away in these schools. Overall, if you look into the story of a national crime by Dr. Bryce, he said overall it seems about a quarter of the children died who went to these schools. This is the early 1900s.
Yeah, let's provide the context for that. Let's talk about Dr. Bryce a little bit, just so people have the context of what his information is and where it's coming from.
Yeah, so Dr. Bryce, you can get his book, The Story of a National Crime. And Bryce is spelt Bryce. An Appeal for Justice to the Indians of Canada is the name of his book, out in 1922. And he was hired as basically a physician to look after the health and well-being of the students. But when his reports came back to say there was a terrible scene there, that there's so many measures that could and should be taken to protect the lives of these children. His reports were met with deaf ears, and he was removed from that position. And furthermore, the statistics were discontinued. So the records for who died and when or what cause are very, very, very poor. I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission says something like before the 50s, I can't remember the exact number, but only a small fraction of deaths were recorded, and actually even smaller were a fraction of their parents and families were even informed. So the records keeping stopped. Now, it was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission says about 3,000 or so.
There's 3,200 was
3,200
the official
is the official number of
Yeah.
children passed away. But it is admitted that the records are so poor that there could be as many as 5 to 10 times that number passed away. So in actuality, there could be 15 to 30,000 children who died at the schools. To put that in perspective, it was more dangerous for the 15,000 number. Let's say 15,000 children died. That's more dangerous for that child to go to residential school than it was for a Canadian soldier to fight in World War I. Overall, it was more dangerous for a child to go to residential school than it was for any of our soldiers to fight in our wars. So that puts it in perspective. And then Dr. Bryce also shows that the children were living much longer, healthier lives with their families than at the schools. You know, I've already seen in the media some people saying, well, you got to put these deaths in perspective.
Oh,
you know, at the time.
with the TB and stuff.
Yeah, TB was bad at the time, and and there was a lot of people dying. Mortality rates were lower. You know, first of all, I don't think anybody who talks about, let's say, World War I veterans and say, oh, so many people died. I don't think anybody would go and say, well, you got to understand at the time around World War I, you know, a lot of people were dying, you know, like, no, like, you know, the veterans need to be acknowledged and honored for going into that situation. And I think the same for the children, you know, that were taken. They need to be honored and acknowledged that they went into that situation, that it was more deadly for them to go to those schools than it would have been if they stayed home with their family. And these are the stats. Actually, Dr. Bryce was saying that Indigenous children, a lot of them were living healthier lives with their families than a lot of the settlers were even. When they, you know, some communities had a rougher time of starvation that, from the fallout of the buffalo, but once they were able to, you know, get into farming and things like that, until the peasant farming policy came along, which disrupted that. But they, you know, Dr. Bryce says that the children actually live very healthy lives in their home communities compared to even settler children.
And this is firsthand too.
This is firsthand.
Dr. Bryce was there.
stats.
He saw it. He witnessed it. He measured it.
Yeah. That's right.
This is not just, you know, stuff that he read. This is stuff that he saw and wrote in his book.
That's right. Yeah. So, you know, some people might say, well, yeah, a lot of people died from TB, but really the reason why the 215 children are so impactful and so sad for our nation is because they're the tip of the iceberg. It's not just this one site. They're all over Canada.
There's like 138 or 139 schools, I think, in Canada. Yeah.
And every single one of them needs to be searched this way for us to know the truth.
Yeah.
And it's the tip of the iceberg. And when you understand the history of how the schools were run, how the children were malnourished, how the schools were underfunded, then you start to see like that there was a lot of things our government did that served to make these schools way more dangerous and deadly than they needed to be.
It's baffling. Like listening to that, to this book, that all our relations by Tanya Talaga, and she goes into like pretty in-depth detail about what's going on in there. And like there was schools that had homemade electric chairs to torture children and stuff. There was children who were left in a closet and literally just starved to death in closets. This is firsthand accounts from people who remember it, and the famous story that that Gord Downey made famous, right? Of
Charlie Wenjack.
Yeah. Who ran away and perished, right? And all this stuff. And it's just disgusting. And yeah, when you see the people online trying to defend these schools, and they're like, oh, it's not a mass grave, it's just unmarked graves. And you're like, did your school have an unmarked grave? Because mine sure as fucking hell didn't. Like, what are you talking about? And then the TB thing, there's, even in that book, she mentions there's evidence to point out that some schools were bringing in people and children that they knew had TB specifically into the school.
Yeah.
And there was just, and there's proof of that, even from as high as the prime minister saying, you know what I mean? Like John A. MacDonald saying his craziness.
Yeah.
About, you know, it's just, the more you dig into it, the more disgusting it becomes.
Like there's medical experiments, taking place. You know, there's a lot of, infanticide there, because of the sexual abuse, and assaults that took place there as well. Yeah, there's very harrowing stories that I've heard from firsthand accounts as well. And you know, people, there's a lot of amazing people that have lived through those situations, and they're scarred though. They never get over it. I mean, I don't know how you could get over a priest raping you, let's say, as a young boy. I don't think you ever could.
No.
But you can hopefully try and cope and manage in a good way. And then maybe your next generation of children are able to, you know, live in a good way, mentally healthy, spiritually healthy, physically, emotionally. But a lot of people aren't able to overcome that. And that intergenerational trauma is very real.
Yeah.
And to this day, it is still present. And that intergenerational trauma gets, you know, that it plays out through addictions. It plays out through incarcerations, and all that. Then again, you know, when a family is suffering intergenerational trauma and they're maybe suffering addictions as a result, like then child services will come in and have to remove the child to put them in a safer home. So, you know, the fallout from these schools is still very real, and is still costing us billions of dollars to put Band-Aid solutions on. And I just would suggest to people to really try and look deeper as you have, Matt. And I'm so grateful that you're, you know, just putting in the time to educate yourself, because we need so many people to understand. So then we can help to build these families and communities up, you know, so it doesn't cost so much money, and it makes us all less safe, you know. And, you know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they say, education got us into this mess and education will get us out. And I truly believe that. Like, once people understand the scale and the depth and the impact, then I hope that their heart can open and they can start feeling compassion, you know, for people. And then start working with government, working with their schools, working with their families, you know, to create a healthy atmosphere, to bring some justice, to bring some healing, you know. You know, the way I look at it is, you know, we're all so connected. And if you see it in the terms of like our neighbor, you know, if our neighbor is having a troubled time, we can't pretend that that's not going to affect us.
Yeah.
You know?
There was some quote, and I'm totally pulling a blank on it. I don't remember, but the gist of it was, like a nation is only as strong as its most like troubled or hard off person, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
if a measure of the success of a nation is how well off or how poor off their worst and like most unfortunate person is,
yeah,
then like we're all doing terribly. Right?
Yeah.
it's easy to measure how much like what the GDP is and that kind of stuff, but that doesn't measure equity or health or well, one thing I think that the trauma thing, the intergenerational trauma thing, is a hard one for people to understand.
Yeah.
And there was an interesting quote from, I don't know who said it, but I read it in the book, again, in the All Our Relations. And she put it in perspective. She said, this was in perspective of losing your culture, going to residential schools and what leaving there kind of was like. And it was, think of all the people that love you. They're like tethers to you.
Mm-hmm.
You cut those ties, cut those tethers, and you have nothing to ground you. And she added at the end herself, she said, so if you have nothing to ground you, you have nothing, no one telling you who you are or what you should be or how to be a good person or how to survive in this world or how to live in this world, then why not kill yourself, right? Yeah. Which is that she's speaking in the book. She's speaking specifically to the epidemic of
suicide,
in Indigenous culture and how it's disproportionate to the rest of the country and the world, right? So I think that idea of intergenerational trauma and how it affects people and how it still continues to affect people, I think is where people fall apart. They forget, they think it's baloney or whatever. I don't know what it is, but I think that's important. That's the important thing to understand, is how these things that could have happened generations ago are still affecting the children, grandchildren, great grandchildren. I don't know.
It's there's a lot of research on that. I think of also Dr. Gabor Mate. He does a lot of good work on explaining the intergenerational trauma and how trauma plays out in our society to create a lot of these epidemics that we see, that we really need to heal the trauma in order to heal addictions, mainly, and depression and suicide, mental illness, anxiety, all that. There's a lot of trauma out there. The intergenerational, I guess the best way you can explain it is if, I had an elder tell me, he said, a little boy came up to he heard this story. Little boy came up to his dad one time and he said, "Dad, how come every time you get drunk, you beat me up?" And he says to his son, he's like, "Well, it's because every time my dad got drunk, he beat me up." And he went to his dad and he asked the same question. He said, "Dad," and he brought his little boy and he said, "Dad, how come every time you got drunk, you beat me up?" And he said, "Well, let's go talk to my dad, because every time he got drunk, he beat me up." So they go talk to the boy's great grandfather. And he said, every time I went to that school, I got beat up as a person. I got beat up when I spoke my language. I felt so terrible when I got out there, and all I could do was get drunk so I don't have to feel, reality anymore. And so, that is the cycle that we see. The children, they don't know how to feel safe, and then they grow up and they don't know how to make their children feel safe, to grow in a good way. They don't know how to make their children feel love and acceptance. So right from a little child, they're left isolated, alone. And so that's where all of these issues, addictions, mental illness, depression, that's where they're rooted from. And if the person isn't able to have the opportunity to heal, then it could pass to the next generation and keep going. Some of the issue is elders say that these traumas will take generations to heal. So maybe their children won't fully be able to heal yet, but maybe their children's children will. And it really helps having a society then. Maybe it'll take less generations if there's a society out there that's safe and understanding and compassionate and able to bring that love. And then these kids don't feel so alone. They don't feel like everyone's out to get them because they know society has a good heart for them. You know, and a lot of people I would really hope that people don't carry on some of these myths like Indigenous people are lazy, Indigenous people are drunks, Indigenous people just want handouts and everything for free, because that creates a society that's uncaring, that's just saying, oh, you have yourself to blame. When, you know, they really, like, millions or billions of dollars in your taxpayers is what led to that family being spiraling out of control for generations, you know? Like if we didn't spend the tax dollars to the police force that captured these children, kidnapped these children, to take them to tax-funded schools in the first place, you know, then we wouldn't be seeing as many addictions. We wouldn't see all these people struggling. You know, we'd see a lot more people that are contributing to their families or communities, to the nation. Yeah. You know, not that there aren't a ton of Indigenous people doing that already. Most people are, actually. But the more we can understand this as a society, as a nation, the more we can have that compassion, then the more healing and growth we'll see. And not just for Indigenous people, I think for everyone. You know, I think a lot of people could use that type of societal bed to nurture them, right? Love and compassion, you know, and determination. Like, those are 3 key teachings that I've learned from my elders on how to build a good life. And I, you know, I'd really would love to see Canadians, have those teachings and teach that to their children. Love, compassion, determination. You know, those 3 things will change the world. And then the whole world will look at us, you know, and be like, oh my God, look at what Canada's doing. Like, right. How are you doing that? How are you doing that? We need this, please.
Yeah. I don't mean to bring it down, but it's so interesting to me in a terrible way how there's so much resistance to that.
Yeah.
You know, and it's people defending these actions and trying to, and maybe it's out of a sense of they want the absolute truth. So they think that they're being righteous somehow, but really they're just feeding into the same lies and bullshit that's been going on for 100 years. I mean, in order to hide this, like, for example, I didn't know about residential schools even existed until I was an adult. I was in university when I learned about them. Didn't learn about them in school, right? And then I had to go through that whole journey of like, okay, what is that? Well, like, denial, and then like, you know, what actually happened, how bad actually was it, and then you realize that, well, there had to be an entire system in place to keep this hidden from us. Like, this doesn't just hide itself, right? Like, there had to be an entire system that existed throughout my childhood still to hide this. And it was when I had that realization, I was like, this is terrible. Like, this is not like, sure, like a lot of this happened in the past, but it's still going on in a way.
Yeah. You know, it's hard for me to comment on that. I guess all I could say is there's always been spin.
Yeah.
And to protect people's, you know, livelihoods, I suppose. I feel that people probably, honestly, all of them try to do the best they can with what they have.
I believe that as well. Yeah.
And there's some people just don't have the opportunity to have good teachings, I guess you could say. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they say reconciliation is about no shame, no blame, no guilt. So we talk about this not to point fingers, not to blame people, but to have a space to share truth, because you need truth to grow. If you don't have truth, you're not growing. You can't grow. I can't see how you can grow without truth. So this is the importance of truth. And this is the importance then of no shame, no blame, no guilt. Because we can't judge, let's say, for example, a child growing up with white supremacy, misogynistic teachings, let's say, which is a form of intergenerational trauma in my mind. They probably got that taught through their parents, and maybe there's some, I don't know, like landlord that kicked them off the land centuries ago that put them in poverty, and it started a cycle. I don't know. Yeah. But like, people somehow, you know, we have this world built now where children get these teachings. They have no defense. So how can we blame these children? How can we blame a white supremacist as an individual? Sure, maybe they, you know, we got to have them held to account for their actions. Absolutely. But it can't just be 100% that. We have to also look at what was the environment that this child grew up in. How did they get those teachings, and how did their parents get those teachings to pass down? So we can't blame them. Yep. And if we start yelling at them and blaming them, then it's just pushing them away. It's just pushing these children away. So then how are they going to have the opportunity to learn the truth?
Yeah.
So that's why it's very wise, I feel, that our elders, they have teachings of reconciliation for how to bring the community together, because everyone's related. Everyone's family. We're all brothers and sisters. So how can you kick your brother and sister out? You can't. What are they going to be outside the circle and then, you know, just looking in at you? Like, they're still going to be, you know, a bug, or they still can, they can still cause damage for your community, maybe. So you need to bring them in and give them opportunity for truth. Bring them in and model compassion, love, and determination for them. So then they have the opportunity to undo their worldview of white supremacy. They have the opportunity to undo their world of misogyny and accept it, because they know that they're safe. They know that I'm not going to judge them. They know that I feel that they're my brother, that they're my sister, and I care for them and I respect them. So they know that they can come and then hear the truth, and they can ask the questions and they know that it won't offend me, because I know I still respect them and I have compassion for them for having those thoughts. And then they can ask me those questions, and I can give them the truth then and undo those myths.
Yeah.
And it's so wise. And that the elders have these teachings, because it is not what you would think we need to go. The media, we seem to have a very us versus them.
Yeah, very divided
perspective.
Still, yeah.
You're either racist or not racist.
Yeah. There's no growing.
Exactly.
Or in politics, my favorite is she's a flip-flopper. And you're not allowed to grow as a person and change your mind. Like,
exactly.
What?
Exactly. Yeah. We need to change our mind. We need to have that room for people to grow. That's why, you know, I can understand why when some people, let's say, put out a Facebook post and it's all like racist, terrible violence in their words. And then they lose their job when it comes out public. They lose their job and everyone's like, hooray, this is what we need to do. Well, I don't know about that, because let's say they lose their job. Now they're in poverty. Now they're more embittered, you know, and they could just as easily blame the woke, you know, liberals. Yeah. And where's the opportunity for truth for them then?
Right.
And the most heartwarming stories I hear are when people, they get an opportunity, they say something totally violent on social media, racist, and then they get an opportunity to work with elders, and then they come back and they have tears in their eyes because they realize now what they said was so wrong. was so hurtful and damaging so many poor, innocent people, children even, Now that is so powerful to me. I love those stories. I want to go give those people big hugs and say, thank you. Like, this is what we need. This is so much courage for you. I have so much admiration for you to change. This is so hard.
Oh, it's nearly impossible.
Almost impossible.
Yeah.
Yet it happens, and people do it because they have the opportunity for truth.
Someone showed them the time.
That's right.
The compassion to be
That's
like,
right.
Why do you feel this way? What is going on? It's the hardest thing to do.
Hard.
Is to
so
show
hard.
that to somebody that shows you true hate or whatever, right?
That's right.
It's funny. We want this quick solution, this justice, put that person in prison, have them lose their job, screw that person kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
It's the same
Throw
mentality.
them away.
Well, it's the same. It's the same problem we have with our quote unquote justice system as far as as far as putting people in prison. Like you put them in a cage and you say, well, you have your time out.
Yeah.
See you in 15 years.
Yeah.
And I know there's lots of people in that system that are trying to help them. There's therapists that are trying to further them, and there's people that come out of there well. But there's so many people that come out of there with no extra tools.
Yeah.
There's no healing. They come out and they're still a quote threat to society because they've had no opportunity to grow.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting issue because you want those people to pay for their crimes or their problems, but you don't want to commit to them the opportunity to become a member of society again or to grow and to learn. And it's so hard. You have to forgive as the you know what I mean? Like you as an Indigenous person, first and foremost, it seems like you had to go through the hard work of having to forgive your suppressors before you could even, you know what I mean? Like I can't imagine how difficult that would have to be, right? Like I've never had to do anything like that. I come from a place of great personal privilege of like, I bought a new home a few months ago and I left my house this morning and I'm worried about things like I'm looking at my lawn and like, oh, that patch of grass looks kind of shitty. And like, meanwhile,
we're stressed about it.
There's an entire nation of people or nations of people across Canada who they can't even get fresh water.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what the fuck am I worried about? And it's, but we don't take that time to look through people's lenses and to appreciate it. Right.
It's really difficult to, love your enemy, so to speak, your perceived enemy. It's really difficult to, have that compassion for, people do need to be held account for their actions. They do need to be held and be responsible for their actions.
Right.
But it's not a black and white thing. It's not 100%. It's just the individual. Society as a whole also has a duty to act in a responsible manner. So how do we do that? It's very difficult. You could say, well, you got to go to the schools, you got to go to the media, you got to go to like all of our institutions so that they can support that. So they can maybe, look at the prisons, for example, and recognize that this person that's going to jail here for a crime, they come from generations of people, in and out of jail who have ties to Indigenous, to residential school.
You can basically trace back all of individual issues, individual problems, and then societal problems when you scale it up back to trauma in some way. It seems like it seems like it's all trauma in the end. If you follow the rabbit hole far enough, at the end of it,
seems to be so much.
The source of it is trauma, and it's just like, how do you blame someone for the trauma they've? I get it. You have to be held responsible.
Inflicted, as a small child,
exactly.
Like you got to have compassion for that little boy, that little girl, right? And I think the more we can bake that into our societal institutions, then we can start, reducing children care, reducing people generation after generation being homeless, suffering addictions, going to prison, that cycle, right? And these are teachings through so many Indigenous cultures, and again, it just speaks to another opportunity we have in front of us to meet some of our most challenging issues in society: addictions, depression, suicide, and our youth are feeling them more and more and more. We need solutions for them. And there's so many in Indigenous cultures that could help. And you see it too when these kids start working with elders. Their lives flip around.
Right.
They're living good, healthy lives, raising good kids themselves. Yeah.
Well, I actually met my. I was helping do some training, some forestry training, up in northern Alberta. There was members from a bunch of different bands there, and we were training them on how forestry stuff works, right? And there was a couple gentlemen there that were, they had no opportunity to learn their culture, right? So they went out, similar to, I'm assuming, the way you did, and just seeked it out and found it and learning it, and they've become very enriched by it. And I didn't get the opportunity to speak to them. I was only there for 2 days, so I didn't know them, but my dad was there, and he's gotten the opportunity to learn from them a lot, and how exactly what you said, when they refound their culture through great hardship of trying to find somebody to teach them, it changed their entire life the way it did for you as well, right? Yeah. And there's so many challenges that way, and now, like, a lot of my understanding is that a lot of First Nations cultures is that you don't teach somebody else's, like, children or whatever, the stories, like the parents or the grandparents, like, their elder has to teach them, and it goes down. But then a lot of people don't have those people anymore. So it's like, it's
tough.
It seems like it's an impossible task for First Nations folks, Indigenous folks who have suffered from this, to try to refine their culture and try to refine their purpose, and to be proud of who they are, and to shed that shame. Yeah. And there is, it can happen. There's cases of a nation, there are only 4 speakers left, and the language is was in danger of going extinct. And with the language comes the whole culture, because in the culture you have ideals of, we're all connected, ideals and principles of love and compassion, and that's woven in the language. Yeah. Every word will have that worldview behind it, that wisdom, that knowledge behind it. So when a language dies, it's like a whole, like, imagine an entire university worth of knowledge, or several universities worth of knowledge, like, disappearing. But they can be resurrected. And there's cases of only 4 speakers left of a language, and the nation mandated all of their kids and all their members to learn 1 word a day, and then after 3 years, it's almost 1,000 words, and that's enough to kind of start speaking. Yeah. And so they were able to revitalize their language and keep it to this day, and it can still happen, but it needs that kind of support. It won't happen on its own. And I really hope that government and Canadians can help with that support. And it'll benefit our children, benefit our economy, benefit our environment, our international reputation. Like, there's so many benefits to revitalizing these cultures. Well, and like you said, the strength of a nation is how well off its poorest members are. Yeah. Right. And if you can pull people out of poverty and out of misfortune, that enriches everything. The whole culture moves forward with it, right? It's not like this nation can move on, and, like, the successful people, quote unquote, can, like, continue to innovate, continue to change, It's like, no, well, that success is going to be dragged down by people that don't have basic needs.
That's right.
And so there has to be some equivalence, some equality, some equity there.
Has to.
And it seems like, although it's hard to do, it starts with just having conversations and learning.
Yeah.
And so
it's simple, actually. It's simple,
but it's hard.
It's hard, but it's simple. Like, it's just, again, I go back to love, compassion, determination. It doesn't get more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And if we can live that way, if that way is in our heart, it'll come. The truth will come, and we'll see it, and we'll be able to adapt. And, that's growth. Like, evolution isn't survival of the fittest. It's the species that can adapt most to change. And we then, we need this love and compassion and determination to adapt to, like, the world is changing faster than it ever has.
Yeah.
And those skills are simple ways to address that complexity,
Yeah. 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 It's like you said, it's simple, but I think a lot of people don't have I have the excuse of the podcast to talk to someone like yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like, I have that excuse I can go around and seek knowledge and experience this way. Most people don't have the privilege of that. And so when they're seeking opportunity to learn, like if you live in the middle of downtown Toronto or Vancouver or something like that, or wherever, right? You might not even know where to begin, right? So, like, for you, this is kind of going a different way now, but when we start to talk about, like, reconciliation and starting to heal the wounds and trying to come out of this and create, I don't even know how to word it, like a society that's beneficial for all, where, like, all cultures are celebrated and able to flourish and all this kind of thing. What needs to happen? Like, it seems like we're almost at the point where we're still trying to accept the reality of the past.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So how does someone, like, say not me, because I have the podcast to help me help in whatever way, but someone like another person who's not Indigenous, how do they go about helping? Because I know there's also that narrative of we don't need any more, like, white saviors or whatever,
that's
right? That's a narrative, and I get it, I understand. But if people want to help, I feel like they should be able to help. And how do they go about doing that in a way that's respectful? And
there's so many beautiful ways that people can help, and so many beautiful people that do help, and more. We kind of frame it as as an ally. Just as I'm like a man, I want to be an ally for women. So how do I do that? I raise their voice up. I make space for them to raise their voice up. I'm not there to speak. I'm there to listen and reiterate, So I guess it's the same way with the Indigenous folks. There's, a lot of people, when they're maybe complaining about the Indigenous issues in the news of the day, or, I think, when you complain, or when you see those issues, really try and see what is the Indigenous perspective there. And maybe not go to some, journalist's perspective that hasn't lived in an Indigenous community before or something.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Like, try and listen.
What does the white guy have to say about residential schools? Yeah.
Well, and they might have a lot of good things to say, but you have to still make that space for bringing up the voices of Indigenous people, because they've been too often, ignored or silenced. But
just passed off as insignificant or whatever.
We hear a lot from people that have the money because they can afford to put the message out, right? So it is harder to find, like, what is that those Indigenous people in the Amazon think? Like, very hard to get that voice, right?
No kidding, right?
And there's a lot of good advice too from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the calls to action. If you're looking for specifics, there's things in there. If you're looking for like maybe something on governance or or statehood. Like, look at the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Like, those are good sources to educate yourself with. And then that truth is a good tool for you to grow. And then again, I guess it just, I would really commend people for bringing that love, compassion, and determination in their life. That's what's going to change the world.
Yeah.
If you have that love and compassion in your heart, then, the details don't matter as much because your intent is good. You might make mistakes here and there, and those are important to make because then you refine yourself more, you learn more, you grow that way from those mistakes. But if you're walking that path with love, compassion, determination, then you're going to be going in a good way. Then you're going to be helping to heal some of our, ancestral trauma, our nation's trauma. Then you can start, you bring that love and compassion to just even little things on the street. Like if you see some homeless person, you give that person love and compassion, like those little things make a difference. Maybe then that homeless person you never know, like you never know how that could work. Like I teach Kung Fu for a long time. And I remember there was a guy who came to me, really rough looking guy, definitely living kind of, I think, in the gang lifestyle. And he says, kind of a little chip on our shoulder, like, hey, you take anybody here? And I was like, yeah, you follow the rules, we take anybody. Not thinking that he would show up to train, because a lot of people ask, right, all the time. But whether they come and train is a different story. But he showed up. And he started training and he went through all the lessons. And, at one point he came to me and he's like, Sifu, when you're telling me, because I told him a story about how most of the people that are aggressive on the street, all they're looking for is respect. And they're so aggressive because they don't even have respect for themselves. So they assume that you don't, and that's what makes them really angry at you. So all you got to do is show them respect, and you'll see a change in them. In a lot of cases, in my experience anyways. So he comes to me and he says, Sifu, that means teacher in Kung Fu. He says, Sifu, when you told those stories, I got so mad at you. I'm like, really? He's like, I thought you were talking about me.
Right.
I'm like, well, he's like, well, I know you weren't. And I now know that what you're saying was to help me because I'm doing that. And I'm showing respect to those people that are being disrespectful for me because I know now, I can see that they don't respect themselves even. And he says it works. He's like, you're totally right. And he kept training with us. And eventually, he got out of the gang lifestyle. For that time, it's a long journey for people, but, he had to move on with his life and he had to move out of the city. And he just came to me and he said, Sifu, no one has ever believed in me before. And everyone here in this school believed in me. And he had like tears in his eyes. And he said that meant so much to me, just believing in me. I've never felt that before your school. And he said that's what helped him work to change his life because people believed in him. So you never know. If you have that little moment, you believe in someone, you never know how that could impact.
There's so many people that don't have that, right? They have no one to believe in them, no one to guide them, no one to help them at all. They're just kind of figure it out, buddy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Survival of the fittest.
Yeah. No kidding.
So, but I think that's, there's a lot of hope because, the truth is coming out more and more. There's so many courageous people in Canada. It really is a beautiful, wonderful country. And the truth is coming out more and more. And the more we can have compassion for the people that are still yet to understand the truth, the faster that truth is going to grow. You know, a lot of life, what we see isn't what we get. We think we got to be really hard on people, angry, you know, for them to realize and see the truth. But it's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
You got to be easy on people. You got to be soft on people. And that's power. And then they can start seeing the truth. And again, this kind, you know, like this is like Kung Fu. This is what they teach you in Kung Fu. You don't go force against force. Like you want to flow, like Bruce Lee would say, right? Be like water. You got to flow when the conflict comes. You flow with it, you know, and in the end, like, you know, people beat up themselves, you know, you know, if they don't take the opportunity to come to truth, if they don't take the opportunity to nurture love and compassion in their life, it's going to be hard for them to have a healthy, happy life.
Yeah.
For them, you know, it filters through all the relationships, that intent, that good intent.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. Well, and it goes to like the conflict resolution stuff, right?
That's right?
Like you read anything good about conflict resolution, anything that's worth reading. Mm-hmm. It's all that, right? It's all, don't battle this person, listen, really listen, hear what they're saying, internalize what they're saying, try to address the issue that they're specifically having, and try to see it through their eyes so that you can come out and try to come to an understanding. You may never see things the same way, but at least you can understand each other.
That's right.
And it's, the battling never works, except, you know what I mean? Sure, I guess it works from like a colonial setting or from like, you know what I mean? Like, sure.
On the surface, it seems to work.
On the surface, it seems to work, but like on an individual level.
Short term, it works.
Yeah, short term, it works, but the scar is still there. The trauma is still there. And so it's, it all comes back to the personal, right? And doing the hard work and reflecting and trying to see where
the growth is. Yeah, it's like I teach my students again in Kung Fu about the bonsai tree. And I say, you are like a bonsai tree. You know, why do you think they call it training a bonsai tree?
Oh, they do, huh?
Yeah, because if you want your body and your life to be a certain way. You want this tree to be a certain way. Well, neither of them you can snap into that position right away.
Right.
It takes time. Takes patience. It takes love, compassion, determination, you know, every day to build your life that way. With the tree, you put a little wire around it and you bend it slightly, you know, a week later, you bend it a little more slightly, you know, in time, you can bend that tree to the shape that you want, the beautiful shape that you want, but it takes time, love, compassion, patience. If you wanted it right now, it's going to snap that tree and kill it. Right. So it's the same thing when we grow in our life as well. We don't want to put pressure on ourselves. We don't need to blame ourselves. We need to show love and compassion to ourselves. And then we can, build day by day, slowly more understanding about the truth. And it's totally that interest-based negotiation that you're talking about too. Like, you know, maybe you don't have all the answers by the time you're done.
Right.
But you should hopefully have a really good understanding of the other person you're talking with. And then hopefully have a really good understanding of what you feel.
Right. And
maybe then that's a good place to work together and collaborate together when you have that pure understanding. You know, again, sometimes the process is more important than the end result, right? Yeah. And the process of coming in with listening, with openness, with kindness, you know, that is way more important than maybe understanding, you know, statistics. Or even more important than knowing, what's the solution? You know,
that's where my mind jumps a lot of the time.
Yeah,
like there's this issue.
Yeah.
Like even with my relationships with my wife or my friends or whatever,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
I have this problem. Like, well, here's the solution. Like that's not what I need to talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I struggle with that all the time, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my mind, I developed as a young man when I was going through university. It was very much about like, oh, this science, like science has
Here's
answers.
the answer.
Here's the answers.
Yeah.
And slowly over time, I started to realize that there's like Neil deGrasse Tyson has a great quote where he says there's 3 types of truth. There's personal truth, religious truth, and fact, right? There's like scientific truth, right? And he's like, scientific truth is fact. Those are things that we can't, but the other 2 are always negotiable and changing and flowing like water, and that's what's growing, and those are still true, even though they're not scientifically evidence-based, but they can be true to you or true to your faith or whatever. And I started to, for a long time, I was just going like, no, fact. What's the fact? No, go away. That's fact. And then you start to integrate those other truths back into it, and you get a more comprehensive picture, and you start to, I feel like that's where a lot of the resistance comes from, right? As people
want the answer right away.
They want the answer. And like, I don't want to have to think about this. And something you said about the growth and that kind of thing is something I notice in myself now when we were talking about growth and we were talking about not judging and trying to see from people's perspective and recognizing the trauma and all this. In myself now, when I'm in a conversation, whether it's in the podcast or personal life or whatever, whenever I have an emotional response to something someone's saying, I, instead of blurting out my defense or whatever it is, I try to just slow down,
pause,
and breathe, and think,
be curious.
Why am I emotional?
Yeah.
Why am I? It could be something that I had nothing to do with. I was not responsible for, but I have this like belief, this faith, like you're challenging my beliefs, so like I have to defend it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, how about just sit for a second? They're not challenging you. They're just, this is their perspective, their truth, their reality. And like, it's been an interesting journey to be able to reflect that way, right?
Yeah.
Like that emotional reaction is so visceral and so like that's all online conversations, right? It's all emotion, no forethought, no it's I'm gonna get you kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's a challenging one to do, but it's what's needed, I guess.
It's very challenging to pause, breathe, be curious. Very easy to go into fight or flight response. But again, like that's where the growth comes from, you know, where we separate ourselves from like the animals, I suppose, is where we can have that moment to pause and then ask those questions, of ourselves and of the person we're talking to. You know, and oftentimes I find when you keep asking questions, then they start understanding more. And you don't have to tell them like, well, this is what you're saying or this is what you're doing or anything. No, you just keep asking the questions.
Let them find it.
And then they'll start putting the pieces together.
Yeah.
You know? And then you just let them stew with that for a bit. I find a lot of times people might not agree with me in the moment of the conversation if there's a disagreement. But then later on you come back and then you hear them say something that you told them and you're like, okay, it did sink in.
Yeah.
And we just have that patience, you know, and understanding, love and compassion for those people, right? Because, you know, we probably would think the same way if we lived their life, right?
Right.
And it really is about the process that's more important than the end result. Like with anything, like, you know, if you went to university and you got your degree right away, how useful is that degree?
Right.
Like nothing. It's not worth anything because you didn't go through each class, each step to build the knowledge that's behind that degree.
Sure.
And the same Kung Fu is like people want to all of a sudden have like a good punch or be good in self-defense. And they want to get to that spot. But they don't realize that, well, you got to go through the process of doing your push-ups, of doing your cardio, doing your stretching, doing your drills. And all of that is going to be messy and ugly. You got to go through the ugly before you get to what actually is beneficial for your life.
work and suffering that goes behind learning those things.
Yeah, totally.
And that's
yeah.
life. That's life.
That's life.
Right?
It's like that picture of an iceberg I saw, right? And everybody sees the tip of the iceberg. Everyone sees your success. But what they don't see is all the iceberg underneath the surface, which is made up of your failure.
Yeah.
Failure over and over and over, right?
Yeah.
But that's the process of truth. That's a process of growth, and it's a journey, and what helps you along that journey, love, compassion, determination. Then you're going to build your life in a good way. Then you're going to build your nation a good way. Then we're going to change the world. And that's what it's all about. If we're able to come in and have that love and compassion for our neighbor, that's going to model the way. Oh, that person, that's how you have love and compassion. Some people don't even know that.
Right. Yeah.
Some people don't even know what love is or how to have love.
It's control. Yeah.
Yeah. It's more like a superficial, what looks good on the outside. Maybe that's where the love is.
This is the measure of success.
Yeah.
That you have a loved one and
that's
you do
right.
well. Yeah.
That's right. But they don't know that love is humility. They don't know that love is giving, that love is listening, that love is like, forgiveness, all those things that you got to walk every day.
Yeah.
Right. To build that love. And it's definitely not like an end. It's not an end destination. It is a total journey. So, that there is a lot of hope. People are learning more, and it's hard to maybe when you just see the media to have that hope. You think like, oh, it's just us versus them. Like, oh, it's hopeless. These people are never going to change.
The media don't represent the people. No.
They don't. They want to get people's attention.
Yeah.
Right.
It's their job to get clicks. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
not to disparage journalists.
No,
it's just saying
they do a lot of good work still.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, that's just kind of the context of the media. They're set up to make money, and so everything that comes with that is part of that way to give the knowledge. But if you look beyond that, with just simple people day in, day out in our lives, there's so much love and beauty there. There's so much hope.
Absolutely.
And the more that we can as individuals, cultivate that love, compassion in our life, determination. That's very important. The more we can do that, the more people are attracted to that, and they see that and they're like, oh, look at that person. Oh man, they're like, I love their energy when they're around. Like, I'm going to try to be more like them. I'm going to try and do that here and there, you just plant those seeds in it, and that's how it changes the world, and that's out there, and, kind of like we're dealing with a lot of culmination of history right now. And the more it culminates, the more, I guess, pressure we feel from it all, the more that's actually spawning a lot of hope, spawning a lot of change as well. So I feel that there's a lot of reason to be hopeful for a better future for us to live in truth. And I'm going to keep doing that work myself and try to be that change, as they say. And I encourage everybody to do that and try and, make their decisions in life kind of based on those tenets, right? The love, compassion, determination. And then, then we'll start seeing justice, and then we'll start seeing more, peace. We'll start seeing more wellness, probably see more backyard barbecue jams that, we'll have good times, and people totally chill and feeling confident to be themselves, and they don't feel like they got to hide. They can be themselves full on. At the end of the day, that's what we want. We want all these people in Canada to believe in themselves.
Yeah.
We want all these people in Canada to feel like they have gifts that are amazing, that they are a very essential part of the community, of the nation. That's what we want people to feel confident to be the people that they're born to be.
Yeah.
That's what we want. At the end of the day, that's what this is all about.
No shame.
Yeah. No shame, no blame, no guilt, and then we can all come together in truth with ourselves. We're relaxed. We're safe to be ourselves. And then so many beautiful things can come from that.
I love that.
We can do so much beautiful work together. When we're not held back by our own fear, by our own insecurity, by our own doubt. When we have total confidence in who we are, when we have compassion, love for ourselves, it spreads out. Then people can bring their best. They're not afraid. Oh, can I sing that song? Maybe people won't like that song. No, I better not sing that song. No, you'll go sing your song and be full on proud of who you are. Right. And you sing that song. You paint that painting. You make that food. You build that structure. That's how we benefit. That's how we build our communities.
If everyone can be their true self, that's right. How the world is.
That's right. And then if someone comes in and be like, want to teach you something, then you don't take offense. You're not like, oh, they pointed out my mistake. Oh no, I could that's so tough for me. They believe in themselves. So then when someone points out a teaching for them or a mistake, they believe in themselves so they can say, oh yeah, I could do that better.
It's an interesting point you make, because I think about times when I've been in talking with Indigenous people about stuff, and I'll make a point of some kind or whatever, right? And then later, years later, I'll be reflecting and I'll think about that was a really stupid thing to say, and they should have been mad, and they weren't, and they just it was like a learning opportunity for me, mm-hmm. but I didn't even recognize it, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that idea of not taking offense mm-hmm. is an interesting one in our culture today, because there's so much offense being placed. Yeah. And it's interesting to hear you say something like making offense is not helpful, right? Like it's not. Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know, because some people would say it is, because it shuts down the bad voices, quote unquote, or whatever. But it's interesting to listen to you say the thing about what does that person mean by that, or what is their perspective, or why do they think that, and not just immediately being like screw you, your band, or whatever, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I know I believe in myself, and if people are coming to harsh on me on whatever, I'll listen to them and see, okay, I'll listen. Maybe they don't have the full understanding of me, which they probably don't. But that's okay. Like, I don't need to take on all that criticism and be like, oh, I'm like this and I'm like that. Like, sometimes when people criticize, it says more about them than it does about me, It says more about where they're coming from and how they see the world. And I don't need to, take all that on, because I believe in myself. Right. And I know I'm doing the best I can. Right. I know I'm trying to go in a good way. Love, compassion, determination. Right. I know I'm trying to do the best I can. And I still have a lot of good friends around. I still have a lot of good fruits from my labor. Right. That shows me that I'm doing not too bad for myself. But I'll still listen to them and be like, oh, wow, maybe they do have a point where I can improve. And that's my attitude. That's how I see it. I love that. And people do kind of try, I guess they don't know how to maybe respectfully give feedback sometimes.
Oh man.
I'll give you an example. So that's a challenge.
I'll give you an example. I wasn't going to talk about this, but I will, because it's kind of come up yesterday. So I did this Good Fire series with Amy Christensen. She's Indigenous. That her last name is relevant.
Yeah, like me.
Yeah. Amy Cardinal Christensen. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it was her podcast. It was her thing. She's running the show. I'm just there for tech support, and she wanted me involved to try to provide that white perspective, honestly, right? Because we're talking to Indigenous cultural fire burners from around the world, and she's like, if I just go talk to them and my friends, we're gonna get carried away And anyone that's non-Indigenous is not going to understand what's going on. So just, I need you to like dial it back and provide, like, ask those hard questions that white people are thinking, kind of thing, right? And so that's the role I played. And yesterday I got a direct message to my personal Facebook account of an Indigenous gentleman just basically telling me to fuck off.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we don't need you invading Indigenous spaces and this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, I internalized that like pretty big time, right? Because I'm like, I get it. I don't. If I ever do respond to this person, like, I probably won't. Just out of like my personal account, like, it's like, I don't need to go down that road. That's not my job. But I internalized that for hours yesterday. I was just like, maybe he's got a point. Like, maybe I shouldn't be talking as much. And then I still haven't spoken to Amy about it, but I will. Yeah. And he had a point for sure. I felt he was unnecessarily rude, and the fact that he took the time to like go and find my personal account, connect me, and like try to message me. Like, I thought it was pretty aggressive. And same thing, like, there's a learning opportunity for me. Like, maybe I can take some notes from what he's saying. There's some truth to that. Like, I get there's pain and there's something that I can't help. I'm another white savior kind of thing, right? Like, I don't want to be that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you said, like, at the time I was doing the best I could with the information that I had and trying to be a good ally and trying to do this thing. And if I did do something wrong, then I'm sorry. And I'm going to learn from that and do better, right?
I mean, and this person probably didn't know that you were invited to play this role, to do this. And this person probably doesn't know how hard you are trying to educate themselves. And they might even have their own trauma that they can't.
I would assume so. I think he's an Indigenous gentleman, which I would assume is probably guaranteed.
So maybe he got triggered from something, right? And we can understand that. And, you know, when I get that too, some people come and think that I'm not who I am, and just maybe.
Do you get the you're a token Indian thing or whatever?
Well,
people say that. I know. I've heard that. I've heard that phrase. I don't mean to be disparaging, but I've heard Indigenous people use that phrase, right?
Not necessarily token, but just some people, I guess, only hearing a little bit of what I'm saying and not being able to put it in a fuller context.
Gotcha.
And it could be difficult for people to have difficult conversations. So, you know, I respect that. And all I do is I say, you know what? Your feelings are valid. I'm not going to ever pretend that you shouldn't feel a certain way. And I'll just say, for me, you know, I say sorry. You know?
Yeah.
It's just as easy as that for me and I mean it. It's not like lip service, but I'm just saying, you know, I'm not perfect.
Right.
I'm imperfect. And I try my best, and I'm sorry about, if what I said offended you. Like, I totally, you know, and then I have an opportunity to be like, you know, I'm totally on your side and I'm totally got your back. And, you know, like I try and support everyone. I believe in everyone, you know, I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. So I that's how I try and have those difficult conversations when people come at me.
Yeah.
You know, and
do you get a lot of that?
Well, yeah, more so when I was younger and maybe didn't. I look back and I'm like, oh, I could have said that better. I could have said that better. You know,
we're younger, we make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, you know, I try and listen to my heart more and be like, okay, is what I'm saying like imbued with love and compassion and determination, or is there fear in what I'm saying? You know,
and so fear. I like that. The fear.
I try and like, I don't hide from the fear. I try and face my fear so that I can bring love through. You know, I can use the fear in a good way to energize myself, you know, and not like, use the fear to retaliate, to bring more fear, to grow more fear. You know what I'm saying?
To lay the blame and to do this stuff.
It's so easy to do that and just, you know, shake your finger at someone, or, you know, me coming from a hockey background too, like to just like drop the mitts and
the aggression is
tangle
fun
the jerseys up.
Yeah.
But like,
there's something in our nature that wants to be aggressive, right? Like it's, the violence is inherent.
You know, so that's like, kind of, I guess, you know, an understandable way, I guess is what I'm saying. And it's very hard then to to use that fear in a good way. And it takes practice, it takes wisdom, it takes experience. But that fear, then when it comes to me, I can say, no, I'm not going to use that fear to retaliate. I'm not going to use that fear in a bad way. I'm going to use that fear in a good way to bring that truth now. I'm going to use that fear in a good way to energize my courage. So then I can bring the truth,
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. I think that's basically, what it's all about when you're trying to have these conversations, because otherwise people can, really, turn away from truth. And then we're all just sitting in fear together. You know? No. How do we bring the love, compassion there?
Yeah.
So then people, like, if I have that intent, then my words flow better.
Right.
If I have that intent, then they're like, oh, I've never experienced this before in my life. I feel safe to have this conversation.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
That's what it's all about, because people are so afraid to have a conversation about what they maybe believe, what their worldview is. They're so afraid that then they just withdraw, or they look for people to confirm that.
Right. Yeah.
And then it becomes even more dangerous.
Times, yeah. Do you think when do you think that people that are kind of, you know what I mean, the resistance towards residential schools and towards recognizing the true history of Canada and kind of where it came from,
mm-hmm.
do you think they have the perception that Indigenous people want, like, Canada to burn, like Canada to go away kind of thing? Or do you, like, because to me, what I'm hearing, like, listening to you and listening to Matthew Wildcat from the University of Alberta, who I spoke to about treaties, and to like Fabian Gray, and to Amy, and to people that I've been lucky to get close to, Indigenous people I've been lucky to get close to, the idea is that, no, like, we want the treaties to be held true. We want the treaties to be part of Canada, we want Canada to be its best version of itself. This is not a tearing down of Canada, not a destruction of Canada. It's a building up, and let's make Canada the strongest it can be, so that we all know the truth. There's no secrets, there's no hiding, and we can stand up and be truly Canada, the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah, confident people, full on.
Yeah, or what Canada can be, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea of what Canada can be, not what it was made into, kind of thing. So
yeah, I think, there probably is Indigenous people and a lot of people that want Canada to burn.
Sure.
Because on all types of worldview, maybe they want Canada to burn.
There's everything, yeah.
Because there's so much trauma.
Yes.
There's so much trauma. Just like people, they just want to take drugs to not have be able to live in their truth, or to just, unfortunately maybe commit suicide.
Yeah.
Because they're afraid to live in truth. So because the truth has so much trauma. So people, that's how they react. They don't necessarily maybe have the opportunity to have the teachings to deal with trauma.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that probably want Canada to burn. But I'll say, probably want the world to burn. They want their own lives to burn, right? So much trauma. But I will say Indigenous cultures in Canada are generally one of complete openness. They say everyone is welcome in the circle. So Indigenous cultures see Canada as a family. So you can't cast out your brother or sister. You can't burn your whole family down, because it's your family too. Then what do you have? So I feel, in a lot of the wisdom of the elders that is taught to me is that we do want the treaties to be honored and lived in the hearts of every Canadian.
Right. Because
those treaties were made between God and many peoples to live in peace, to live as good neighbors, to help each other. Because they acknowledge that if my neighbor is starving, then I'm starving. It's like if, just to put it in more context, like let's say you have your neighbor malnourished, and then their immune system is depressed, and then they get a disease. Now you could have fed your neighbor, they didn't get the disease, but now they have the disease, and you're around them all the time. You can catch the disease now. They're living right next to you, right? So that's how, if you're able to help your neighbor, then you're helping yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the way the elders look at it. Mother Nature, Mother Earth gives to us freely. So we are to give to each other freely and to the earth freely. That's a principle. So since we're all related, we want to give freely so we all build each other up.
Yeah.
And then when we're all built up, then our whole family is strong, right?
Imagine a Canada like that, right?
Oh man, I do every day.
Like it's
I know. Yeah.
It's like the power of a Canada like that.
Oh, change the world.
It's overwhelming to think of a nation that can truly hold up its past and hold up what it did to account for it and to make it better and to work through it and be proud of it. Is like it's almost scary in a way, and how powerful that nation could be from the sense of, you know what I mean, of prosperity and doing well for everyone. And it's just, that's only in the best interest of the entire nation, no matter what your background is, whether you're from China and you live in here, or from India, or if you're born here or whatever. Absolutely. It's just only beneficial to everybody. Yeah. No, this is this is a 2-hour conversation.
Oh, is it? And man, it's just time is flying by.
I know. I feel we have to end it eventually, but it's going into this conversation. Like I said to you before, I usually go into these conversations being well researched, and I have a general kind of, I call it just kind of like a storyline, kind of a way to introduce subjects and then to talk about the subject and then kind of finish off the subject, right? With this one, I couldn't figure it out. Like there was just so much. So I'm thankful for you, first of all, for coming here and for being vulnerable and telling your story, because I can't imagine how difficult it must be for you. And also just for providing that context for everybody and to talk about this. And because I basically just let you talk is what I was trying to do, right? Because that was the story that needs to be told here, is that Indigenous peoples have had a terrible hard go, and like this needs to be, we need to acknowledge this. Like that's all it's really being asked for, is can we acknowledge that this happened and this is real? Can we that's all that people are really asking for. And it's
at this point
there's so much resistance to it, and it's just it's troublesome. So anyways, my point was that thank you for coming on, for talking about this. This was enlightening, and I learned a lot, and I feel I've grown, and I'm looking forward to going forward with the knowledge that you've delivered. So thanks. Thank you. This is great.
Thanks, Matt, for the invite and the opportunity. And I really hope this helps people to look at things in a good way, and to, you acknowledge truth in others and you acknowledge truth in yourself. And when you have that truth, like, that's how you grow in a good way. So I hope that everybody listening and everybody in our country, in Canada, can have that opportunity to acknowledge the truth in themselves and in others, and to build up their life with love and compassion, and to feel confident and believe in themselves. To be the best person that they're meant to be. And when we can support others to do that, then we can also be that, And once we're all confident people, we can deal with trauma together. We can deal with struggle together, because we have the tools then to work together to solve our problems, solve our challenges.
I love it. No, this is awesome. This is such a great conversation. I feel like I'm talking to a shaman, like this enlightened being, right? Who's got like you've done the hard work, right, to figure out how this life goes, and it's just I'm thankful for your perspective.
Well, I'm thankful for the opportunity, and I'm thankful for the opportunity I had with all my great teachers, my elders, my sifu. So that's it's my duty to pass that knowledge on. It's not for me to keep, it's for me to share. So, I appreciate you helping. So,
it's my pleasure. This is awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Thank you so much, Michael, for all of your knowledge and experience and vulnerability in speaking your truth. I really, really appreciate it. I know it's going to make a difference. And thanks for allowing me to learn it firsthand and for speaking to me. It was awesome. So I hope you all learned something. I hope you got something out of this. And do what you can. Take Michael's words and do whatever you can to be an ally, to help. And just be mindful of everything he said here as you go through your life and your career and your personal relationships. And I don't want to be preachy. This is just me. This is my opinion. So anyways, thanks a lot for listening. We'll catch y'all next time. Take care.